Think about a quiet town where everyone knows your name and it seems impossible to keep secrets. Every night, people from different neighborhoods meet for dinner and wave at each other. Kids play in the yard. It looks like everything is calm, safe, and normal. But what if I told you that something terrible was happening behind one of those white picket fences? An event that was so shocking that it shook the whole community, and the replies only made people wonder more. This case is not about a violent act that happened by chance. No, this is a lot scarier. It's about a mother, father, and their children who were torn apart in the worst way possible. And in the middle of it all, the guy no one would have thought of. We're going to learn a lot about the strange case of the Haynie family in this video. A story about secret struggles, cries for help that go unheard, and the scary things that happen when people don't say anything. Could this happen in your neighborhood? Or even in your own house? Let's work together to find the truth. It all starts with the Haynie family, a group of 6 who live in the nearby town of Grantsville, Utah. The story is all about the Haynie family and their adventures as the main characters. The Haynie family is the main focus of this story from start to finish. It seemed like they were the ideal family, with smart kids, hardworking parents, and a really tight-knit community. It seemed like they were the perfect family, and that idea was shaped by all these different parts coming together. But on a freezing night in January 2020, that dream of perfection was getting shattered pretty regularly. This happened in January. Back in 2020, you could say this thing happened. What happened on Thursday evening at the Haynie house was really unexpected. It was one of those things that just caught everyone off guard since it wasn't planned at all. The event totally caught everyone off guard. Anything that could possibly become real was seen as just that, anything. The community felt the pressure to address issues that everyone was hesitant to talk about. They really wanted to steer clear of that. But it happened anyway. The community really struggled to come to a resolution for the problems because of this. When morning broke, 5 lives were changed forever, and the town was left trying to process the terrible events that had just happened. What might lead someone to decide to end the life of a family member they deeply respect? What factors could push them towards such a choice? One of the questions we need to think about is how such a terrible catastrophe could happen without anyone noticing the warning signs that were right there all along. So, to start off, what were the things that actually got everything rolling in the first place? January 17th, 2020 is one of those dates that comes with some interesting details. As the day wrapped up, Grantsville turned into a spot that felt both peaceful and invigorating. A neighbor called 911 around 6:15 p.m. to report an emergency situation that had happened. A neighbor was keeping an eye on their health and really cared about them. He was really shaking as he told the story about hearing gunshots from the Haynie house. He was telling the story with a voice that was shaking quite a bit. He said he heard them coming from the entrance of the building. When the police got there, they found a really tragic scene. 4 family members, including the mother, her kids, and a 12-year-old child, were found dead from gunshot wounds. The mother was the only one in the family who made it through the shooting. The mother was part of the family too. The only family member who came out of the shooting unscathed was the mother. She was the only one who made it through. The mother was the only one in the family who made it through the shooting unscathed, and she was the sole survivor. She was the only one who had managed to make it through up to that moment. Even though the father was the 6th person to be attacked, it didn't change the fact that he was struggling to communicate with himself and was fighting for his life. Both of these things were happening at the same time. He really struggled to find a way to connect with himself. Only one person has managed to get through this disaster. This person is one of a kind. Who is this person? So, there's this young guy, just 16, and his name is John Haynie. He's a young guy. In this situation, he's one of the people we're talking about. They were looking into the situation as if he was the one who committed the crime. But it wasn't like he was being seen as a victim. Instead, the focus was on him as if he had actually done it. The living room, often just called the living room, was where a conversation happened at the start of the story that unfolded in the living room. I kick things off by pointing out this interaction as the first thing to discuss. There were splatters of blood on the walls, and you could catch a faint whiff of gunpowder hanging in the air all around. Along with the overturned furniture, there was blood smeared on the walls too. It was possible that all of these items were in the room. Finding all of these objects wasn't as tough as you might imagine. Tasha, his mom, and two of his younger siblings were found near the couch after they had sadly passed away. Tasha, in particular, was found dead. All these people had died, and their skeletal remains were found in that spot. It turns out that every single one of these people had passed away. At the beginning of the investigation, they discovered that his mother had died. She was the one who had left this body of existence. While they were looking into the upper floor of the building, the police found his sister, who was just 12 years old back then. After everything that happened, the officers managed to find her. So, it turns out that there was a message on the dinner table that someone had jotted down right at the last minute. They found this out during the investigation. The way the memo was written really gave off a vibe of urgency about the situation. Someone said, "It had to be this way." The exact words shared were, "It had to be this wave." The person in charge of the research was really surprised by the study's findings, which totally caught them off guard. This wasn't just a murder. It was something that had been thought out ahead of time. This is really the key part of what's going on. On top of that, there were more illegal activities happening. On the flip side, it's hard to understand why a young child would want to harm the environment around them, especially in their own family setting. The reason for this is that the environment feels familiar to the young person. The reason for this is that the environment consists of people from his own family. Detective Sarah Graham, a seasoned investigator known for her careful methods, was overseeing the investigation for the department. She was in charge of the investigation from start to finish. During the whole investigation, Graham was the one in charge of everything. Everyone knows that the system she uses is super accurate, and a lot of people really respect it. Unlike most people, Sarah took her time to think things through before jumping to conclusions. She took her time with this, even though she knew that if the child did confess, it would just be a part of the bigger picture. She was ready for the chance that he might actually do it. She could totally see him coming clean, no doubt about it. She could totally see him turning around and finally telling the truth. The law enforcement officers who took Colin into custody at the scene really kept their cool during the whole situation. It's pretty clear that the way they managed to put handcuffs on Colin at the same time shows what kind of situation they were facing. As he softly said, "I did what I had to do." He finally got to that moment where he could make a choice. This happened when he could get to that place. Given how horrific the situation was, even the most seasoned police officers couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines as he shared his thoughts. Their bodies started shaking uncontrollably because of what he said. While he was being questioned in the interrogation room, Colin managed to stay calm and seemed almost completely uninterested in what was happening around him. He really gave off that vibe. Even though he admitted to shooting his family, he really didn't offer much of an explanation for why he did it in relation to the case. He mentioned something like, "They did not understand me." That was one of the things he said. Some of the things he said were a bit unclear. There were just so many questions coming in from the public that the investigators couldn't keep up with all of them. Here are some questions we asked all the participants. Do you think this could be seen as an example of mental illness? Those are the questions that were part of the collection of Mounties. The question that needed to be answered was whether there was any evidence showing that the house had been used improperly as a place to live. What if this is? Maybe Colin was feeling some pressure from someone else, not just himself. This is something that might have happened. Here's a situation that could have happened. At first glance, it looked pretty obvious that the reason was pretty clear. There was a family quarrel that was getting out of hand. This was super clear on the surface. A lot of time had gone by while all of this was happening. As the investigators dug a little deeper, they stumbled upon some concerning aspects of Colin's behavior that had popped up recently. The investigators found that these features were pretty new, which is why this was the case. This situation came about because the inappropriate action happened not too long ago. His neighbors figured he was polite, but they noticed he didn't talk much overall. People who lived nearby all seemed to agree on this. To the general public, he seemed like a pretty reserved guy. Also, one of these individuals referred to themselves as a typical adolescent. Here's another example that shows how they identified themselves. His classmates' comments really highlighted something. In the months before the accident, Colin had been getting quieter and quieter. A clear picture came together here. Here's a look at how the narrative evolved over time. This answer was just like the one given by people who were around during the time he was a historical figure. Rather than going to school, he decided to stay in his room for long stretches and steer clear of hanging out with his classmates. He did this to steer clear of getting rejected by his classmates. He decided to do this activity instead of going to school. All the choices he made were completely his own doing. It became clear that things took an unexpected turn after that moment. This happened as a result of what came before. While the police were doing their routine search on his phone, they stumbled upon a bunch of concerning text messages he had sent to himself. The authorities have come across these texts. He kept these communications saved on his mobile phone, which he always had with him. Just to clarify, the person we're talking about was the one who received these messages. Colin joined in on a chat happening online about a forum that was also on the internet. This chat was happening online. By the time we got to that point, we had been chatting about this for a few weeks. He had also been showing a strange interest in violent actions and talking about the issues happening within his family in this forum. On top of that, he had been showing a bunch of extra behaviors. On top of that, he had shown that he was keen on getting involved in physically aggressive activities. One of the messages that really caught my attention was the one that said, "If they won't listen, I'll make them understand." That one felt especially important to me. At this point, things are starting to get a bit murky. The text messages Colin sent to himself hinted at a plot that involved someone else. Now's when things start to get a bit murky. Colin's text messages to himself had these indications included in them. During his conversations, Colin shared some hints through the messages he sent. While chatting with these other folks, he called one of them friend several times. I think it's really important for me to get to know this person better. How much is he inclined to be swayed by what others do? And how likely is it that he can be influenced by their actions? So, after looking into things, the police figured out that the messages actually came from another kid who lived in a nearby town, pretty close to where everything first happened. The young man, when he was brought in for questioning, quickly started to challenge everything that was presented to him about the event that had happened. He jumped right into it as soon as he arrived. He mentioned that he never really thought for a moment that Colin might react to the texts, even though he had said several times that he and Colin were just joking around about them. He said he had never even thought about doing that. Not once. When he was asked about it, he said he had never even thought about the idea in his whole life. There's a chance this acquaintance might be mixed up in something shady, but it's also possible he's being honest. Both of these options are on the table. Both of these options come with their own unique outcomes that set them apart from each other. During the research, we ran into some tough challenges at every stage of the process. Even though it had been a few weeks since everything started, the pressure from the public just kept building up. Even though the crisis had just started, this was still the case. This was a really important step to ensure that the folks living in the neighborhood could get help during the emergency. While everything else was happening, Graham, the detective, was busy wrapping up the mental evaluation he was doing for Colin. As Colin's representative, he was really getting into the investigation. It was really tough to hear that Colin had been diagnosed with a serious personality disorder along with untreated severe depression. That news hit hard. This was a big eye-opener that happened because of the disclosure. This revelation was the reason behind the whole situation, which happened because of the revelation itself. It's true that both of these things are accurate, which we didn't know before. The new information really sheds light on that fact. He felt more sure than ever that his family was scheming against someone just like him, even though there was no proof to support this idea. He felt more sure than he ever had before. At that moment, he was more convinced than ever before. He knew that his family was supposedly scheming against him, and he was aware that this was something that had actually happened. He thought they were plotting Samana on the flip side, when Colin's father, who had made it through, started to understand and talk. That was the biggest change that happened. This ended up being the most significant new development. The biggest difference between the two was definitely this point. This was a really important event for moving up in relation to others. It was shown in a pretty bad way, and his evidence painted a bleak picture of what's really going on in the situation. The situation was shown in a negative light. He thought we didn't love him, his father said, tears streaming down his face. He was wrong. 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 It seemed like he thought we were trying to stop him from coming into the country. But he got it wrong. He was totally off base, though not on that particular occasion. The message left at the scene really made a lot of sense. It was an interpretation that hit the mark perfectly and made total sense. Collins' claim that it had to be this way really wasn't a valid reason at all. It was more like his twisted way of trying to justify himself against a threat that was never even there to begin with. The statement really didn't make any sense at all. Honestly, the saying, "it had to be this way," is spot on. So, Graham, being a detective back then, managed to put together what happened that evening and the circumstances around it all. Graham managed to put together the situations, which made this possible. Colin was getting ready to head out for work, and he decided to wait until his dad had already left before he made his move. Before he left, he made sure his dad was already gone. We had to take this step to avoid any possible interruptions. After his mother passed away, he started to turn each of his siblings against him, starting with the youngest and moving up to the oldest. He did this right after his mother passed away. This course of action was taken in response to the terrible catastrophe that had just happened. Colin's dad made a surprise return, which led him to grab the pistol and head out to meet him. But just before he actually confronted him with the gun, he hesitated and stopped. Colin's dad had to have a talk with him about the pistol. Right now, everyone was taken by surprise by Colin's father's return. Colin's dad brought the pistol along during their chat, making it a part of their conversation. Because of the mistake that happened, his dad managed to stop further damage and even save his own life. This happened because of the mistake that was made. So, in this ongoing investigation, Colin's facing 4 counts of aggravated murder all around. All these charges are connected to the same incident. All of these charges are related to the same person. After he decided to plead guilty, even though he was dealing with mental illness, there was a lot of back and forth about his choice. They chatted about whether he should get a life sentence in prison or if he should go to a mental health center for treatment after his conviction. He trial turned into quite a spectacle, and it really split the community along political lines. There were folks who thought Colin was a murderer, someone really brutal who didn't deserve any pity or compassion for his victims. They thought he had to be a pretty ruthless killer. People saw him as a murderer. This young guy was going through a tough time, feeling really sad and let down by the system, which was just a really rough experience for him. What others think of him suggests that he was a young guy. While Detective Graham was mulling over the case, he had a big light bulb moment that struck him. While he was thinking about the case, he had this realization. What really gets to me isn't so much what Colin did. He wrapped up, "We really need to think about what could have been done to stop it from happening in the first place. What preventative measures could have been taken before it occurred? Alter T. Wagic event. The people who remain were laced with a legacy Matt was really tough to deal with. This legacy came about because of the tragic murder of the Haynie family. Even after everything calmed down and the issue was taken care of, this still held true. Not only did the behavior break the laws that were in place back then, but it also acted as a wake-up call for those involved in the act. Basically, what happened was against the rules. This situation really highlights how mental health issues can often be overlooked for a long time, and that can lead to some serious consequences, even life-threatening ones. It's really important to remember this fact considering what's happening right now. We're currently dealing with this situation. If things had been handled a bit quicker, the outcome might have turned out differently. We really need to figure out if it had the ability to change how things played out in that situation. Can you give me an idea of how many households might be dealing with similar issues but keeping quiet about their struggles? If that's the case, just let me know. I really hope that this story will be used as a helpful guide someday down the line. It's really important to focus on the people who are closest to you at all times. This holds true no matter what the situation is. Sometimes, the quiet cries for help are the ones that resonate with us the most, even if we barely hear them. You could say that this happens pretty regularly. This happens pretty regularly because of the situation we're dealing with. Since we're getting closer to wrapping up this chapter, I'd like to ask you to keep an eye on the next example that follows. Can you go ahead and do that? Since you're diving into this mystery, you'll get the chance to rethink everything you thought you knew about justice so far. This is what you'll find from More Investigation. Your investigation will guide to this conclusion, which is going to be the best outcome you can reach. Also, Considering your perspective, what do you think about this issue? If something like that were to happen in your town, what do you think the chances would be that it could actually occur there? How well do we really know the people who are closest to us? How well do we actually know them? Do you think it's even possible for us to recognize them at all? Is it even a little bit possible that humans can recognize them to some extent? How likely is this to happen? Even just a little?